Good Thursday morning, March 16th, 2023. Old school versus new school baseball analysis. I'm going to do E.R.A, earned run average. Which baseball era? Old school, 1870s through 1949, or new school, 1950 to 2022. Which era was better, the pitchers, better at E.R.A, the earned run average? Let's look at the stats. I compiled them, did the research. 1870s. I take a 10-year period. I find out which pitcher had the best E.R.A for the season. And I list the pitcher and the earned run average for the season. Take a 10-year period, list them all, average it out. What is the average of the 1870s? 1.90. Who had the best for the decade? Pud Calvin, 1.16 1 year. 1880s, the average 2.04. Who had the best in one season? Tim Keefe, 0.85 earned run average. 1890s, the average 2.58. Who had the best in the 1890s? Cy Young, 1.93. 1900s. Who had the best for the decade? Mordecai Brown, 1.04, and the average for the 1900s, 1.57. 1910s, the average, 1.48, and the best for the decade, Walter Johnson, 1.14. 1920s, the average, 2.51. Who had the best? Pete Alexander, 1.91. 1930s, the average 2.40, and the best for the 1930s, Carl Hubble, 1.66. And the 1940s, the average was 2.50, and the best in one season for the decade was Hal Newhouser, 1.81. So the aggregate earned run average for the first 75 years, 2.12. Very good. Let's look at the 1950s, which is the new school era. The average 2.52. Who had the best in one season for the decade? Whitey Ford, 2.01. 1960s, the average 2.008. And the best for the decade, Bob Gibson had a 1.12 1 year, 1968. 1970s, the average 2.35. Best in one season, Tom Seaver, 1.76. 1980s, the average 2.83. The best for the decade, 1.70, Nolan Ryan. 1990s, best average, or the earned run average for the decade, 2.26. Who had the best during the decade? Greg Maddux, 1.56. And the 2000s, earned run average, 3.23. Who had the best during that decade? Pedro Martinez, 1.74. When I say the best for the decade, I'm indicating who had the best earned run average in one season during the decade. Okay? So the cumulative aggregate E.R.A for the second 75 years, 2.54. What did I say old school was for the first 75 years? 2.12. That means old school wins. Better earned run average during the old school era for pitchers versus the new school era. Agree or disagree? That's it. Debating it and I'm analyzing it, and it's my analysis and my opinion. But what I did in this book was compare and contrast the old versus the new. I took 13 offensive categories. Batting, old school wins. Hits, old school wins. Runs scored, old school won. RBIs, new school. Home runs, new school. Triples, old school. Doubles, old school. Singles, old school. Slugging, new school. On base, old school. Total bases, new school. Base on balls, new school. Stolen bases, old school. So that's 13 categories. Old school won 8-5 over new school in the offensive categories. As far as pitching, wins, old school. Innings pitched, old school. Games started, old school. Complete games, old school. Strikeouts, new school. The new school era had more strikeouts. Shutouts, old school. E.R.A, old school. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 7 categories there. And the old school won 6-1. So add up these 20 categories, 13 in the offense and 7 in the pitch. 20 categories. The final score, old school 14, new school 6. Was the old school baseball era better than today's present new school baseball era? That can be debated. But according to my research and this book, old school wins. You know what I'm going to do next? I'm not done. Because I'm going to look at defense. I'm going to look at fielding percentage. Who is better, the old or the new? I'm going to look at chances, putouts, assist, double plays, innings, fewest errors. Who do you think wins there on the defense? Stay tuned. I'm out.